해서 이렇게 영상을 만들고 있는데요. 오늘 아침부터 장도 안 좋았고 오늘 참 오늘도 살짝 하락한 상태에서 시작을 했죠. 그리고 오늘 코인이 상당히 제일 안 좋은 모습들을 보여주고 있는데 지금 그 이유는 중국에서 암호화폐에 관해서 더 큰 밴을 때렸어요. 모든 암호화폐 트랜잭션 거래는 다 불법이다. 중국에서 아주 큰 규제를 더 추가를 했고요. 원래 있던 규제에다가. 그래서 지금 암호화폐 전반적으로 지금 거의 한 10% 가까이 떨어지면서 안 좋은 모습들을 보여주고 있는데 안녕하십니까. 다들 안녕하세요. 그리고 그래서 결과적으로 지금 테더, 뭐 비트코인 다 모든 암호화폐 종류가 모든 암호화폐 거래가 불법이라는 이야기가 나오면서 현재 암호화폐가 안 좋은 모습을 보여주고 있습니다. 지금 중국이 뭐 주식이든 암호화폐든 모든 것에 지금 아예 악의 축으로 모든 것을 떨어뜨리고 있네요, 진짜. 예. 참 좀 뭔가 어렵습니다. 와, 중국이 저렇게까지 크게 이야기할 거라고는 좀 저도 생각을 못 했는데, 예. 참, 네. 무튼, 네. 지금 암호화폐가 떨어지는 이유는 그런 것으로 보이고요. 그리고 좀 있으면 이제 파월이 연설할 텐데 이번 주제는 이거예요. Perspectives on the Pandemic Recovery. 발음도 잘 안 나오네. 한마디로 이제 팬데믹의 유행에서 회복하는 것에 대한 관점에 관하여라는 뜻인데 약간 글쎄요. 어떻게 될지 한번 찾아보도록 합시다. 유튜브 채널에서 봐야겠다. 오케이. 소리 꺼놓고 시작해놓고 시작하면 같이 보도록 합시다. 다스님, 안녕하세요. 일찍 와야죠. 이제 파월 형님이 또 좀 있으면 라이브 하시잖아요. 당연히 와서 같이 여러분들하고 같이 볼 준비를 해야죠. 우리 파월 형님이 나와서 좀 있으면은 라이브를 시작하실 것 같고, 오늘 FOMC에 있었던 것에 대해서 추가적으로 이야기를 할지는 잘 모르겠어요. 오늘 이야기할 거는 약간 팬데믹의 회복에 관해서 약간 실업률이나 아마 약간 그런 쪽 이야기를 하지 않을까 싶은데 하게 되더라도 이제 뭐 그건 예상이니까요. 정확하게 뭐 약간 질문들이 오갈 거라고 생각하는데 개인적으로는 조금 에버그란데 이슈나 암호화폐 관련된 이슈도 좀 얘기를 해줬으면 좋겠네요. 브레사트님, 그렇게 말씀해 주셔서 감사합니다. 다스님 주신 걸로 일단 만나는 아이스 커피 사 먹을게요. 아침부터 좀 커피가 좀 필요하네요. 어제도 좀 늦게 잤거든요. 어제는 좀 놀다가 늦게 잤어요. 어제는 좀 놀다가 늦게 잤는데. 네. 후비정님, 반갑습니다. 와주셔서 제가 반갑죠. 제가 반갑죠. 일단 이야기를 할 준비를 해봅시다. 자, 셋업 일 끝내고 얼굴을 여기 있는 거를 옮기고. 그러게요. 카자바 사이언스 저도 잘 들어간 것 같아요. 카자바 사이언스를 48불쯤에 들어갔는데 지금 62불이죠 아마. 운이 좋은 것 같습니다. 많이 운이 좋았고요. 네. 코인 하락의 원인 1번 적어드릴게요. 코인 하락의 원인은 중국에서 모든 암호화폐 거래는 불법이다. 트랜잭션 주고받기는 불법이다. 양봉 찍었어요? 진짜요? 그래도 살짝 올라. S&P 500 저거 뭐냐? 갑자기 다우랑 S&P 500 위주로 확 찍어줍니다. 시작합니다.
Thanks for joining us. Nearly 3 years after we started holding Fed Listens events around the country, the program has proved to be even more valuable than we could have imagined at the outset. Its original purpose was to elicit broad feedback as part of our monetary policy framework review. And we've long viewed community outreach as a vital part of our economic understanding. And these discussions have delivered such value that Fed Listens has evolved now to join the other regular staples of our outreach work. These events enable us to hear directly from people on the ground at the heart of the sectors and industries you represent, from communities across the country, adding tone, contour, and greater depth to our understanding of the nation's economic portrait. These insights are particularly valuable as we move through this challenging and precedent-shattering period. The speed and intensity of the downturn and the rapidity of the recovery in many areas are really without modern precedent. I'm very glad you could all join us today to offer your thoughts, and I want to thank you on behalf of the whole Federal Reserve System, both for your presence today and for your committed feedback, continued feedback and participation.
와줘서 고맙다.
Some of the issues you're confronting that we'll talk about today are shared across sectors, while others are unique to your fields. Most of you are contending with changed workplaces, from safety protocols whose half-lives are unclear, to fundamental shifts in how your industries operate, in everything from feeding people to how movies are released. Business plans have been reworked, outlooks have been revised, and the future continues to be tinged with uncertainty. While uncertainty often results in immobility for businesses, it can also spell opportunity. And the creativity and adaptability on display over the past 18 months have been among the few bright spots we've had. I've been amazed and inspired by the flexibility and ingenuity, particularly that of small businesses, in shifting to meet the demands of a new reality. So all of us are very much looking forward to the discussion today. You provide a wealth of information by sharing your experiences and those of your colleagues, customers, and communities. That has always been critical to how we conduct monetary policy, but means even more in extraordinary times such as these. So I want to thank you again for providing that insight, and I look forward very much to the conversation. Thanks.
So much, Chair Powell, for joining us and for that introduction. But before we begin our discussion today, I'd like to recognize and thank our Vice Chair, Rich Clarida, who spearheaded the Fed Listens initiative. He launched this series of listening events with the public, as the chair mentioned, as a part of our periodic examination of our monetary policy strategy, our tools, and communications practices that are used to pursue the Fed's congressionally mandated goals of maximum employment and price stability. Over the course of 2019, we hosted more than a dozen Fed Listens events across the country. We found them to be extremely valuable for hearing varied perspectives about the state of the economy, a particular sector, or a pressing economic issue. So valuable, in fact, that we've decided to continue the events over our framework review, after our framework review has concluded. And hearing directly from members of the public about their experience in the economy and their successes and challenges provides important context for understanding economic conditions that can't be obtained from economic data. Our Fed Listens participants help us see through those data from the eyes of the businesses, people, and communities that make up the American economy. That information helps to inform our decisions on policy. From today's event, we hope to gain a greater understanding of how the economic recovery is progressing in your communities and what lies ahead. We hope to hear about recent successes and challenges, as well as where you see the economy heading over the next year and the ongoing challenges that this new normal may present. So with that, we'll turn to our panelists. Vice Chair Clarida and I will ask each of you a few questions that touch on your direct experiences with the pandemic recovery and your specific areas of expertise. I'd invite my colleagues to jump in with their questions as we go along. And I encourage our panelists, if they feel inclined, to respond to comments made by their fellow panelists. So we'll start with Lauren Nelewanski. Lauren Nelewanski began his career at Marriott more than 30 years ago, working as a manager trainee with the Courtyard by Marriott brand in Mesa, Arizona. After leadership roles in all departments at Courtyard, Lauren assumed positions both in the field and within the headquarters organization. He now oversees the franchising relationships for Marriott's select brands, which include Courtyard Hotels, Town Place Suites, Spring Hill Suites, and Fairfield Inn and Suites. Lauren, would you please share with us how Marriott's hotel owner-operators are faring at this stage of the economic recovery? To what extent have leisure and business-related hotel stays resumed? Have most staff that were laid off or furloughed early in the pandemic returned to work? And are there other areas of their businesses that owner-operators are still feeling the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Well, good morning. Thank you, Chair Powell and Governor Bowman. It's great to be here with you. Hey, I think people officially appreciate traveling, and there's no doubt in the last 18 months that so many had to sacrifice so much, and namely stay stuck in their homes and be quarantined for many reasons and just in a close-knit group that they're dying to get out and travel and see around the United States and get back to business. And for that, we're incredibly delighted.
이거 뭐야 이거? 이거 뭐죠?
It looks like Lauren may be having some issues with his connectivity. So, Rich, do you want to go ahead and move on to our next panelist?
Governor Bohm, I'm happy.
Sorry, were you not able to hear any of that, Nikki?
Oh, we did miss most of that. Do you want to start again? Oh, let's go ahead and move on, Rich, and we'll come back to Lauren. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor.
Why don't we go ahead? I'll go after and try to get a little better connection. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Governor Bowman, and thank you for those acknowledgments. The Fed Listens has been a grand slam, and I'm very proud to have played whatever part I could to making it happen. And I'm thrilled that you will be taking on the leadership for the system in this capacity. Our next speaker is Ms. Chidi Kumar, who is incredibly accomplished. She is a chef and owner of the Garland Restaurant, an adjoining music venue, Kings, and a cocktail bar, Neptune's Parlor, in Raleigh, North Carolina. Chidi is a self-taught cook who studied recipes while pursuing a career as a guitarist in several rock bands, something that I appreciate quite a bit. She was a semifinalist in the James Beard Awards Best Chef in the Southeast from 2017 to 2019, very impressive, and was a finalist for the award in 2020. Chidi, to what extent has customers' dining activity returned to where it was before the COVID pandemic? What adjustments have you had to make to your restaurant's operations over the past year? And what have these adjustments meant for the people that you employ?
Thank you for that. Thanks for having me on. I don't know if our industry is ever really going to look like it did before the pandemic. We have been through so many big and small shifts over the last 19 months, from being completely shut down and sort of terrified and not sure if we were going to be able to keep our staff. We did have to lay off most of our folks, and then we, had a core group that we kept on payroll even when we were shut down for about 6 weeks. And then fortunately with programs like PPP and other small grants, we were able to take baby steps. And I think we just focused and continue to think of this entire time as building a series of small bridges to the other side, because we don't really know what lies on the other side. We, in our restaurant at Garland, we reopened our dining room. We did meal kits in the summer, and then we did patio only from September through March through those really cold months, and got really skilled at refueling propane heaters, and bought all kinds of different sizes and blankets and all the whole nine. And last winter I think people were so literally starving for a restaurant experience that they were willing to sit outside in 30-degree weather, literally with a heater at their feet, and having some really warming dishes. And we got through hobbling through that winter and finally reopened our dining room in April. And we had 3 really solid months that were really difficult because we had, a staffing shortage that I'm sure everybody's heard about. And so it felt like we were operating so much like abbreviated hours compared to what we were doing before. And I kept wondering, why does this feel so hard? We were doing dinners 5 or 6 nights a week and had lunch service, and now we're just doing dinner 4 nights a week. But people were, really thrilled, I think, to be out, but there was a certain heaviness that still, I think we kind of all knew that the variant was lurking somewhere. We kept hearing about India, and then here it was. So since July, August, we have definitely seen a slowdown in numbers for sure, and it is nowhere near the level of revenue that we had pre-pandemic. And as you mentioned, we do have a music venue, which I'm sitting in right now. It's been shuttered since March 2020. It's a small, intimate venue, and so is the bar with no windows. And so making this be a safe operation is not really even possible at this time. Several venues that I know of did try to do shows, and their entire staff got breakthrough infections, and that's just not something that we can risk, because that ends up being way more expensive than just not operating at all. So this sort of stop start staggered, try takeout for a little while, let's not do takeout, let's go outside, well, let's do limited indoor, all of these things, there just isn't really a good solution that will ever really make us feel like we're doing what we kind of got into this whole thing for. So I think our creativity has gotten us through, but those reserves are kind of diminishing as well. But I do hope that with the Delta variant slowing down, we are able to somehow emerge with a new perspective and modified core values.
Thank you so much, Chidi. I think I should mention that the governors, after each speaker, can ask their questions directly, so I won't call on you, but we do have some time. Chair,
can I ask a question? So you mentioned the staff shortage, and of course we've heard a lot about that. I wonder if you can provide any color on what is it that is keeping your former workers from coming back, or new workers from coming in? Is it fear of COVID? Is it just what are you hearing from people as you try to hire?
Well, it's a combination of things. We were fortunate when we reopened. We retained a lot of our staff because we were really actively engaged with them. Even after they were furloughed, we checked in on them all the time. We made sure that they had their benefits if they were furloughed. We paid a lot of people to stay home. And then when they came back, everything again was so different. The level of anxiety between the fear of getting sick, people had children who were at home, and we weren't able to provide childcare. We were a small restaurant. And then just, there's an overarching, this is a time for people to evaluate what their priorities are. And I think a lot of people wanted to make life changes. And we lost a lot of people to different industries. A big chunk, I'd say half of our folks decided to go back to school and pursue careers in social work. That was a very common theme in our former employees. And we've reworked our entire pay scale model. Right now, we don't really have anybody who makes less than $18 an hour. And so, of course, that's a significant investment on our part, but it's the right thing to do, and it's the only way forward. And we couldn't have done that without government programs. But it's a combination of things. I think the restaurant industry has been at the forefront of highlighting all the things that are wrong with employment and workers' rights and workers' conditions in this country. And to a large extent, that's a fair. We're a fair target for that. And so it takes a series of small steps before we can recover. But I think it's going to have to be this sort of zeitgeist where restaurants operate a little bit differently than we have thought about doing it before. Like, cannot get by and pay people $13 an hour and expect them to stay with us for years and years. It's just not going to happen. It's not fair, and it's not feasible. But I think it is really a combination of a lot of different factors. And restaurants are kind of like your litmus test. We're a canary in the coal mine. When things are great, restaurants are busy, labor is plentiful, and we make it work. When things are depressed, we're the first ones to get hit. And anytime there's an economic downturn, restaurants are the first ones to show it. And that goes from the supply chain all the way down to to labor.
That's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
Governor Bowman?
Well, I see that we have Lauren has rejoined us. Lauren, would you like to take a stab at answering the questions that we posed, or would you like me to repeat them? Oh, great.
Certainly, thanks, and apologies for the connection issues. From a leisure perspective, business is certainly back and was from kind of the beginning of the spring time this year. We survived on leisure for sure. Business transient or business related travel has not come back as fast as we might have anticipated. And certainly the variant has had a lot to do with this. We were just starting to climb and then things kind of shut down on the business front. Our group business, though, however, is starting to book, albeit a shorter window booking time than typical, but it's starting to come back. And we're happy to see that. We've done a lot to organize really good smart meetings and safe meetings so that we can have things done in person, which I think everyone really appreciates and misses very, very much. Related to staffing, I did mention at the intro, we're 85% franchise business. So we rely and survive on our owners and operators who are individual business people, some with one hotel, some with 10 hotels, et cetera. But we own the brand and the brand name, and really they do all the work in selling and booking and filling their hotels. That being said, they are still struggling. Some owners have told us they lost 7 years worth of profits in 7 months. And that's significant, right? When a hotel company like ours relies on them to keep their hotels renovated, up to date, product wise, clean and fresh for all of our customers, they simply will struggle to find the funds to do that in the near future. So Marriott's working very closely with them and on some programs that will allow us to officially get done what we need to get done, but perhaps in a little different way for sure. There's this whole notion of leisure travel, right? My connection's bad because I'm in the Outer Banks in North Carolina at a beach house, and I'm finishing vacation, but you're able to blend your work and your leisure time. And people are now accustomed to working from anywhere, the way they want, how they want, and when they want to do it. So that's produced an interesting piece, a lot of opportunity, certainly. And it's made us have to be more flexible in our workplace, right? Because I can't have housekeepers working from the Outer Banks when the hotel they're cleaning is in Washington, D.C. That simply doesn't work. So like the restaurant business, we need our folks all hands on deck, so to speak. And so that's, been a little bit more of a challenge. And then I would just say to tag on the supply chain, right? Our owners and operators are feeling the impact of supply chain issues, whether it's food and beverages just getting delivered to our secondary and tertiary markets, where big food distribution companies are just short on truck drivers, right, to deliver the food. We have issues with getting our furniture, fixtures, and equipment we refer to as FF&E into our hotels for all those amazing renovations that are to take place. But it's really difficult when you can't get lighting or you can't get headboards in an entire hotel worth of lighting when you're trying to open so that the owner can produce revenue and start to pay their mortgages, et cetera. So there's so many downstream impacts of things like that. And then from a labor perspective, I think we see the same thing that the restaurant industry sees. We've had to raise rates dramatically. The demand on leisure came at such a quick pace, much faster than we ever anticipated. People were really wanting to travel. Our drive-to markets were incredibly busy, but we simply didn't have the staff in most hotels to effectively clean the rooms that we needed to clean, et cetera. So we had to adapt into our cleaning policies and offer cleaning on demand versus every single day. And some of that is still going on as we move through the end of this year. Many people thought that once the subsidies and unemployment disappeared, we were going to have this plethora of applicants. The applicant flow would dramatically improve, and that's simply not the case, right? I see Sheeta's shaking her head. Like, people have left the industry, unfortunately. They are finding other things to do. Other industries that didn't pay as much perhaps now have rose to the occasion, and they are paying a lot more. And so money certainly gets people to take note or sign on bonuses and things like that. But at some point, the economic model just doesn't work just to keep increasing those wages. So we keep a mindful eye on all of that. But just suffice it to say that our owners, operators are still dramatically feeling the impacts of COVID. While most of our employees that were furloughed are back to work or have been called back to work, that doesn't mean they've shown up. And so we really need to focus on the employment challenges ahead.
Lauren, I would invite any of my colleagues to follow up with any questions you might have.
Hi, this is Chris Waller. Hey, Lauren, you mentioned different things you had to do due to labor shortages, one of them being cleaning on demand. Do you see a lot of this stuff potentially becoming permanent ways that you do business, or do you really think these are temporary? I traveled a fair bit the last year myself, and this was a common thing. Personally, I didn't think it was that big of a deal that they didn't clean my room every day. So my take was maybe this is something that persists.
Yes, Chris, thanks for the question. So I think you're exactly onto something. I think it will never go back to the way it was in 2019 for a myriad of reasons. I think if you ask our business transient kind of traveler or a leisure customer, which is just a couple, for example, they are with you. I don't need people in my room every single day. I'll call when I need something, kind of don't call me, I'll call you. And with the COVID piece, that made sense too. People didn't want a lot of touching and people in their rooms cleaning and just, in the room physically. I think on the leisure side, right, when you're traveling with family and children, mom and dad want the Cheerios picked up off the floor. The rooms are a little bit messy, right, when you're with your 4 children. And so I think we've got to be good stewards of what that experience looks like in our hotels. In fact, we are piloting across all of our brands a new housekeeping procedure that will incorporate all of the things I just said and incorporate customers' comments just like yours, Chris, as we do our focus groups and things with the consumer. But I think, aside from our luxury brands, I think you're going to see luxury will continue the way it is. You expect something when you're paying that kind of money for a room. And so that kind of service I don't see diminishing. But I think as you get into our select brands and our premium brands, even in the full service side, there'll be some adjustments certainly to the housekeeping model in our business.
You mentioned the potential non-viability of the business model given the much higher costs, labor costs. Do you see do you hear from your franchisees that they're thinking about leaving the industry or less interest in coming into the industry? I mean, is it really, or are people going to stick around and see how this evolves?
I think we are bullish on the industry, Chair Powell. I think our owners and operators are too. I think, different from the economic crash that we experienced, right, in 08, 09, banks have been very, very helpful during this time. They've been very flexible, and they've been wanting to work with our owners and operators to get them through this difficult time. And let's face it, the banks don't want to be in the hotel business. Last time they were stuck with many owners handing in the keys. They don't want to go through that again. That being said, though, I think our owners and operators, they thrive. They love this business. It's in their blood. And so I don't see them walking away. We've experienced many, many more transactions of real estate flipping and big investment firms getting involved and buying up groups of hotels, which I think is really also promising, right? When your brands are investment grade and people want to take note and it works for the mom and pop and it works for a huge public company, that is a very, very good sign.
Could I interject here? I agree with everything Lauren just said. I think the danger is with the independent operator that, takes out a second mortgage on their house to open a small business like a restaurant. Maybe not so much a hotel, but I think for our industry, having that community base based corner neighborhood restaurant that, knows everybody that comes in their door, and that's the place where people go to celebrate their birthday. Those are the kind of businesses that I think are in danger of not coming back and getting swallowed up by big investment groups and developers. I guess the show must go on and business keeps going, but there's only so much, a family-owned operation can sustain. We can't keep getting into debt. We can't keep taking out idle loans. As low as the interest rate is, it's a 30-year debt, and you got to think about what, the rest of your life looks like. And the lifelines, again, are small bridges, and it's a scary time without outside help, I think, for people like us.
Lauren, if unfortunately we need to move on a little bit, so I would just ask Lauren if you would quickly respond to that, and then we'll move. I'll ask Vice Chair Clarida to move on to the next panelist.
He brings up a great point. 100% agree. Of our 85% of franchise owners, we have probably 2,000 that are individual, just like you just articulated so well. They mortgage their home, they've got their life savings in this business. And we experience the very, very same thing. I think what we're trying to do as a franchisor is to make sure that we've cut every bit of fat that we possibly can out of the business, that we streamlined it as best we can. And now our role, which is very different if you're not in a franchise organization, I get it, is to drive top line revenue for these owners so that they can make as much money back as they possibly can. Like I said, they've lost, to your point, in some cases, their life savings in the last 18 months. And I've had, unfortunately, many, many of those conversations too. So I think it's a delicate balance, to be sure. We got to get out there and travel, and we've got to get into the local restaurants and have some dinner.
Well, thank you so much for that. Vice Chair Clarida?
Thank you. Our next speaker is Patricia Garcia Duarte, who is the president and CEO of Trellis, a nonprofit organization in Arizona that's dedicated to making stable homes and communities possible, and a very worthy endeavor. Trellis offers housing counseling and homebuyer education. It builds affordable housing and provides flexible mortgage lending products. Since 2020, Trellis has also been helping families impacted by COVID to obtain emergency rental and utility assistance. Again, incredibly worthy. Patricia, please describe the housing situation in your area. For example, are households in low to moderate income communities able to keep up with their rent and mortgage payments? How many are at risk of eviction or foreclosure? And how does current housing affordability compare to pre-pandemic conditions?
Sure. Thank you, Board Member Clarida and Chairman Powell and all other members. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for this opportunity. The housing situation in the Phoenix metro area and Arizona overall is really not good for low and moderate income people in general. So I welcome the opportunity to share that perspective. Many are doing well in Arizona. Homeownership has grown up, increased, but not equally across the board. Not surprisingly, the Phoenix metro market has an affordable housing shortage. And it existed before the pandemic, but it has gotten worse. Rental inventory is at record low levels, as is homes for sale. That inventory is currently under a month. Arizona's population growth, it has been growing, which is one of the factors that is contributing to the shortage, that famous high demand and low supply. But even with new rental production of units, it's not enough to keep up with the demand, and the rents have been increasing. We're now at $1,300 a month on average. The Case-Shiller Home Price Index also reported this summer that Phoenix was the highest year over year in change in home values at 29.3%, followed by San Diego, 27.1%. So we know that building permits are going up, but it's still a challenge because prices for homes are now higher than 400,000. We're at 405,000 according to an August report, and it is expected to increase. And we know that wages are not increasing at the same pace. Now, the foreclosures that are pending are starting to show up now that the foreclosure moratorium has ended. This current situation is concerning to us in the community development space because we have worked really hard to help increase home ownership among people of color. And in Arizona right now, those that are struggling have an option of selling their home. But the long-term impact of selling a home is really stripping wealth away. And it's something that we should be watching for. Investors are very active here in our Phoenix metro area. And that's adding to the housing shortage. During the Great Recession, we lost thousands of homes that once were owner occupied to investor owned, and they've been rentals. So this pandemic has also increased that investor activity. According to a July 2021 Redfin report, in Phoenix, almost 1/4 of homes have been sold to investors. So our low moderate income folks have no chance because these sales are cash. So what about the ability for low moderate income people to pay the rent or the mortgage after the programs go away? I think Chetty mentioned that this has been a lifeline, a bridge to help people sustain in homeownership and having a roof over people's head. The COVID CARES program last year was really critical, and this year the emergency rental assistance ERA has been really critical in helping just thousands of people stay in place in home. This year so far, we've helped thousands of families overall in the city with all the different agencies that have been collaborating to support the city of Phoenix. There's almost 4,700 households just in the city of Phoenix, and we've deployed about $35 million out of $50 million. So there's still a pipeline to go through. It's been very difficult to launch a brand new program during a pandemic, and similar challenges from what was mentioned by Lauren and Chetty already. The staffing, we didn't have the capacity to bring in a new program, but we were able to do it virtually, and that's been a big challenge. Folks don't have all the same types of technology, so we've had to adapt to bring in the information needed to provide that emergency rental assistance and utility assistance. Unfortunately, some of the assistance is not enough. The pandemic has been 18 months. Some renters with the assistance have still been evicted, unfortunately. The ERA program covers 12 months in arrears and 3 months ahead of time. So that's only 15 months. And when you're low moderate income, savings is not huge, and people have not been able to keep up. Eviction Lab tracks evictions in all over the country, and in Maricopa County since March of 2020, we've seen about 48,500 eviction filings. And in Maricopa, it did fall sharply during the pandemic, as was expected, because of the eviction moratoriums. Mm-hmm. But that is soon to expire at the end of October. So who are the people that we've been helping? They've been employees that couldn't telework. They were furloughed or they were laid off. We're talking about office workers, service providers, drivers. A lot of the Uber drivers and Lyft drivers, construction workers. We're talking about many housekeepers, especially in the Latino community. Some have been able to get shifts back, but there's they are still struggling because it's not enough in wages. So people are really desperate. We do see that. We're currently working with a family that is living in their vehicle. There's 6 of them, and they've been homeless for 2 weeks. The first week they were able to go with family, but we're processing paperwork in hopes that we can help them. Unfortunately, their landlord will not negotiate and they will not take them back. And there's so many cases. Every single one is unique. We're really concerned about what the evictions are going to do to people's credits, because that is a long-term impact. And our team and those working in this space know that once evictions get started, I mean, they kind of work through this system. It's very hard to stop. And the impact on the credit report is going to be huge. And finding another place, whether rental and then hopefully longer term in home ownership, it's going to be an impact. So how many people are at risk of eviction or foreclosures? From the Arizona Homeowner Assistance Plan that the Arizona Department of Housing put together for new funding that's coming from the federal government to assist homeowners, there's some statistics there that are pretty disturbing, especially among the FHA space. It looks like the report is indicating 90 days delinquent that are not in a forbearance agreement is almost 79,000. And a large majority are people of color. So that is something that we really need to watch and intervene so that we can preserve ownership. In Arizona, the population for renters is about 2.4. And the August lab report shows that there's been about nearly 6,000 filings. So that is also something to watch, because about 21% of evictions come primarily from 10 top big buildings. So there's room to work with the landlords and in hopes that we can get more time to go through this program and get the assistance that many of these families are qualified for.
Patricia,
So currently,
I think in order to stay on schedule, you've covered a lot of ground here, but if you could just wrap up with your comments, that'd be great.
Yeah, no, it depends on where you're at, right? If the division of the haves and have-nots is really growing in our state, unfortunately. Thank you.
Well, and again, on behalf of governors, thank you for all those incredibly worthy efforts. Let me hand off to Governor Bowman.
Thank you, Vice Chair Clarida. So we'll go back to our lineup, and our next panelist is Mr. David White. Over the past 12 years, David served as the National Executive Director and Chief Negotiator of the Screen Actors Guild, American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, the SAG-AFTRA. In this role, David served as Chief Executive Officer and Strategist for the world's largest entertainment union, with approximately 160,000 members who work in film, television, broadcast news, commercials, music, video games, and emerging media. David, could you share with us what differences you're seeing in the degree to which film and television versus live performances have resumed since the start of the pandemic? What factors account for those differences? And how do you expect demand for live versus recorded performances to evolve over the next year or so?
Sure. Thank you, Mickey. And good morning to everyone. Are you able to hear me? Great. So this is really just a terrific event. I'm so grateful that the Federal Reserve does this. Thankfully, there has been a great deal of presumption of productive activity in the entertainment industry, particularly if you're talking about television and film. I'll speak to the other industries a little later, but in television, we are back up to historical levels of over 500 television shows being produced around the country. That's, if you just think about it, for anybody who watches shows on Netflix or Disney Plus or HBO Max or any of the other platforms. These are really platforms that have a voracious appetite for product. They just need television shows. And really pleased to say that one of the factors that has allowed this level of resumptive activity is the successful collaboration that has occurred within the industry between management and labor. So this is one of the most organized, labor organized industries in the country. A lot of different unions, including the Screen Actors Guild, SAG-AFTRA. And we all got together on the side of labor and talent and employees and worked then together with management to come up with a series of safety protocols that allowed people to get on set. If you think about what happens on set for the television shows that we like, or for the movies that we like, sometimes people are in intimate scenes with one another. They're certainly breathing close to one another. They're doing all the things that the virus loves because it allows the virus to spread. And so coming up with safety protocols to allow for that level of activity to happen was really terrific, and everybody put down their swords, put down differences to come together and to do that. So that was great. And the implications for the industry have been terrific. Employment is up. But also, if you think about the mainstream economy that feeds off of the industry, you're talking about dry cleaners, you're talking about hair and makeup artists and barbershops, et cetera, to make sure that people are looking proper when they are going onto sets. You are talking about restaurants. I certainly appreciate fully the previous comments. And we have felt the damage that the pandemic has done to the restaurant industry, but there is activity in these production locals that is increasing, and we're very happy about that. There are some differences in the way that production happens that I think will be permanent, or at least have the possibility of being permanent. So if you think about caterers, food caterers, the way that food comes onto a set, that now feels a little bit like a high-risk activity. It certainly did during the pandemic, and so the way that people get their food is different, and there are a host of other changes that will likely be built into the business model. So that will be interesting. I'm not sure if that has either a positive or a negative effect economically over time, but that is certainly the case. So on the whole, when you're talking about product that is made for the screen, for the small screen, we're really pleased with that. And when you're talking about the employment levels and the activity of the studios and the producers that are a part of the food chain for that type of activity, layoffs have stopped. They certainly slowed down. On the whole, they've stopped. Employment is up, and that's all a good thing. If you think not about television shows, but about film, like traditional film, when you go into the movie theaters, the business models for film are changing because there's now more money and more focus on television platforms. So activity is down in part because of changing business needs, but it's also down because of the pandemic, because it's viewed as such a high-risk activity to go into these closed in-person environments. So that is increasing a little bit as we learn to live with distancing and masks and things of that nature that allow for that type of live activity to happen in closed environments. But that is still, I think, definitely impacted by the pandemic, and will continue to be so. And if we're not careful, things that we have taken for granted for generations, the fact that in small towns and in big cities, we have theaters, we have places where people can go for movies. If we're not careful, those will not survive. And it may not be economically viable or wise to kick them back up, particularly with the changes in the business model. So I do think that there is a great deal that we have to continue to watch, to monitor, to see whether or not, as it unfolds, we're going to be looking at permanent changes and things that are really a part of the furniture of the American psyche and the psyche, worldwide. But that has been good for on the whole. That is a good news story. For other aspects of entertainment, when you're talking about live production, Broadway and the live production for live theater that very few people think about, all the smaller community theaters across the country that you find, community theater, etc. That is definitely suffering. I know that I join many when I say how grateful I am that several shows on Broadway have resumed, and I, like many of you, are going to find a way to go and see those. But across the country, activity is down. Employment is down. All of the downstream activity that relies on that type of activity, live theater, that is down. So I do think that as we emerge, and particularly as we deal with the Delta variant and the possibility of new variants, that still is a risky area. It's interesting when you think about other entertainment related activity, music, podcasts, things of that nature. We're listening a lot more to that as a result of Spotify and Stitcher and Apple and things of that nature. So that is positive, but we're just not doing it live. We're not doing it in places where we have to be in person. So concerts, they're resuming, they're coming back. Certainly over the summer, there was a great deal of excitement, but then as the Delta variant really kicked in high gear, and people then realized that as a result of low vaccination rates and other, surely other reasons in certain areas around the country, that we may continue to deal with mutations that outpace vaccinations, et cetera. We'll just have to see. So I want to be conscious of time. I would just close by saying that there is a good news story here on the whole, but there are also areas of risk that we continue to monitor and be concerned about as it relates to both productive activity and employment.
Great. Thank you, David. Before we move on to Jill Rizika as our next panelist, I'd like to invite anyone to ask any questions of David. But I might ask if, in the absence of others, Chair Powell, would you like to jump in?
Well, just to make a comment, first of all, thank you for that. That's a very interesting presentation. And also, I'll just say, a lot of us are really delighted to see the TV shows coming back on stream. So thank you, you and your union members for that.
Thank you. We're delighted that you're delighted, Chairman. It's great.
David, I might ask a question about so many of the members of your industry are employed in several different ways. And how are they feeling about the trend that both Lauren and Chidi mentioned in the restaurant industry and those types of additional employment or jobs that they might need to have or have held in the past? How's their approach to that?
Such a great and insightful question. We take a great deal of pride in the fact that in many ways we are the original gig economy, people going from pub to pub and from theater to theater centuries ago. And it is a gig economy where people don't typically know where their next job is going to come from. And to make that work, they are employed in restaurants, they're employed as drivers, et cetera. I think on the whole, people really see the industry as filled with rich people, and the industry is not. In fact, it is the opposite. It's the extreme 1% that has wealth and fame, not even 1%. And you will know this if you look at a television show and you try to think about which actors whose names you recognize. Usually one, maybe two, if you're a watcher, and none of the others who are there. Those are the folks that make up the industry, and they struggle just to get to middle class. They just struggle to get to an economic level of being able to achieve health care that year for their family. So the intermittent up and down employment activity and opportunities that were talked about earlier, with restaurants going down and with other typical mainstay between job gigs. That was devastating during 2020. That is coming back slowly, but psychologically, it just feels more risky. So people are moving to the parts of the gig economy that have been growing when we do Instacart and when we do Uber and other things that require drivers. But it's being channeled now in ways that are very different and where there is not a lot of data or guidance historically to understand how that's going to pan out over time. So I would put that in the same bucket as something that we need to monitor. There are both positives and negative trends there. And it all leads to, in aggregate, people feeling like it continues to be a risky environment, notwithstanding everyone's gratitude that employment levels are generally up in production.
Thank you so much David, for that very interesting and insightful view into the entertainment industry. And shifting now to our next panelist, Ms. Jill Rizika. She's the president and CEO of Towards Employment, a nonprofit agency that helps more than 2,000 individuals every year prepare for a job, find a job, keep a job, or advance in a career. Jill supervised the implementation of an employer-driven job training model that successfully connects residents of economically distressed neighborhoods to anchor employer jobs. She also led the implementation of a national demonstration grant, Work Advance, that resulted in higher earnings for low-income participants relative to a control group. Jill, how has the pandemic affected the job market in your organization operates in, and how has it affected the services you provide? Do job seekers see the pandemic as a surmountable setback, or are they worried about lasting effects on their ability to find work and get ahead?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to participate today. To answer the question of how the pandemic has affected the job market, it's really important to further clarify because the answer varies dramatically for both type of business and for the individual workers, depending on race, gender, and geography. I'm speaking to you this morning from Cleveland in Northeast Ohio, which has many wonderful aspects, but is really a tale of two cities. As even before the pandemic, Cleveland was the poorest city of its size in the nation, poverty rate of over 30%. Close to 30% of families in the city lack internet access, with predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods disproportionately on the wrong side of the digital divide. Last year, the Black Ohioan unemployment rate was 2 times that of the white unemployment rate. And Cuyahoga County, home of Cleveland, receives the highest number of people returning from state prison every year. These returning citizens face more than 850 laws and administrative rules which limit access to employment after having served their time. More than a year after COVID-19 displaced over 1 million Ohioans from their jobs, Ohio still has 269,000 fewer jobs than pre-pandemic. Like across the country, Ohio women were more likely than men to be laid off or forced to leave their jobs, reversing years of progress. Also, as seen across the country, and as we've been hearing this morning, manufacturing, healthcare, transportation, logistics, those sectors remained robust even during the pandemic, with employers desperate for workers. And now that the economy has opened up, retail and hospitality businesses, as we're hearing, are also struggling to fill positions. So how can we have so many people, especially people of color, struggling to meet basic needs, while there are so many employers struggling to find workers, even after seeing movement on higher wages and better working conditions than before? This is a question that we focus on every day at Towards Employment. 80% of our candidates are Black, 60% have been involved in the criminal justice system, 40% are young adults disconnected from school or work, 65% are without post-secondary education, which is certainly a key to advancement. People coming through our doors are what HR folks will call untapped talent pools or non-traditional talent. In other words, those who were often previously screened out of many jobs. We know that the challenge is bigger than what has been coined the skills gap, and that skills alone won't address the challenges before us today or equip us for opportunities that lie ahead. To address the systemic lack of opportunity that all of those above mentioned statistics represent, that COVID exacerbated and continues to influence. In addition to helping candidates gain new job skills through training and experience through paid internships, Towards Employment provides holistic wraparound supports and intensive coaching to build the confidence, the networks, to connect to family-sustaining careers. We also work with employers to think differently about how to create on-ramps for entry-level workers with less experience and more opportunities for second chance hiring. During the pandemic, we had to quickly pivot to remote services and to build out a program to equip our students with the digital skills and tools to engage with us and with all of the other services and activities that required these virtual connections during the pandemic. Digital skills and access to equipment and service are now essential skills. The COVID-related barriers continue to manifest in a variety of ways to keep people from working. This is what we're hearing from students. But parents in particular are struggling. As people have noted earlier today, parents of young children feel that childcare options just aren't safe, or they worry about bringing home the virus to their young children who are still at home. Or they've tried to work, but because of outbreaks, children are being sent home from daycare or school, making their schedules impossible to manage. Or the digital divide intervenes. A young mother tried remote work, didn't have sufficient broadband to make it work. We've even experienced that this morning. Some are not in the workforce because they're in transition or choosing alternative paths. Again, as we've heard this morning, people don't want to go back to the same old job. Many of them coming from previous retail and hospitality positions, and recognize that they need new skills and support to take advantage of new opportunities. Some of these new opportunities are in healthcare, but we also see that those who are burned out by the intensity of the work leaving that field. So it's incredibly fluid. Others are engaging and thriving in their new jobs, that may not have been open to them previously, but success is still precarious. Take Allison, who was working a minimum wage job after a period of incarceration. She identified driving as a potential career, got her CDL, and now she aspires to not just own her own truck, but to manage a fleet of trucks. But her progress is threatened by the turmoil in the schools. Her son didn't do well with remote classes and is showing improvement since the return to in-person. So Allison isn't sure what she'll do if they close the schools again. She had to leave her job. Still others, as noted again already, are getting by with gig work and trying out entrepreneurial endeavors. There are some who are not in the workforce yet because they're dealing with some of the same challenges they've dealt with all along, irrespective of COVID. Lack of transportation, lack of stable housing, having a criminal justice background, struggling with substance abuse. It has been encouraging to see what some businesses here in Northeast Ohio are doing to address some of these challenges. Some of the things that we see: employers expanding their hiring pool, engaging with community partners and the public work system to build on-ramps, earn and learn programs, internships, and apprenticeship models. For example, embracing returning citizens as a target talent pool, developing customized training programs with a commitment to hire and to support these candidates' professional growth. Emphasizing job quality. It's more than just about compensation. Thinking job design to reduce stress and to value workers. Eliminating certain screening criteria that are unrelated to work and present artificial barriers to connect to work, and like the requirement to be nicotine free to work at a hospital. Our hope is that the recognition of the value of this untapped talent will lead to further investment in closing the opportunity gap, lasting change, and creating and sustaining more jobs, family-sustaining jobs for all our workers in the community. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Jill. Any questions for Jill before we move on?
I'm just curious because my husband and I drove to Delaware because our daughter decided to put her house on the market. So we drove, down one side of Michigan, up the other, and through Ohio and Pennsylvania and Maryland, and it just seemed like everywhere we went there are jobs out there, but the story that Jill's telling of the disconnect is really difficult. I mean, from a Panera Bread that opened 2 hours late because employees didn't show up in Saginaw, Michigan, to it was just as we talk to people across the country, it seems like finding employees is very difficult. And if it's okay, there's a program called, I think, Shelters to Shutters in the multifamily industry. And they're trying to put those people that are coming out of incarceration into jobs. And so if you don't know about them, it might be a good connection.
I think we should proceed. Our next speaker is Gina Dingham. Gina is an expert in multifamily housing and founder of Everest Real Estate Advisors. Gina combines more than 25 years of industry experience and expertise with market research to provide commercial real estate solutions to a broad range of clients, including local, regional, and national owners and developers and equity holders. Gina, how would you characterize the demand for multifamily housing right now? Are you seeing any notable shifts in demand, for example, urban versus suburban, or large metro versus smaller? And how has the pandemic affected your outlook for housing supply and construction activity in these different areas?
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me today. I appreciate being here. Multifamily is as strong as it's ever been on about any metric that you choose. And I can empathize with the story on Arizona. Arizona is a very hot market right now, as is Dallas, and markets that are. I'll just back up a little bit. The demand is strong from renters and from investors. So on the capital market side, there's a lot of money chasing yield, chasing deals, and because multifamily is performing well, a tremendous amount of institutional capital is coming into the market. That's causing cap rate compression or prices to increase pretty dramatically, and it's playing into the rental rates that we were talking about. I mean, fund managers, whether they're pension fund managers or life companies, have to put their money somewhere, and so they're looking for markets that are performing well, and they too want to make a yield for the people they're representing. Biggest shift probably is away from some of the traditional gateway cities, San Francisco, Seattle, New York, and is an investment into smaller secondary and tertiary markets, and some smaller, I mean, they would not even fit into a definition of secondary or tertiary. I talked to somebody this week that was building in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is, I think, a pretty small town. It's been a long time since I've been there, but institutional money doesn't usually go to Boise or Grand Rapids or the smaller cities that we're seeing, and so developers want to put product in those cities because they don't have enough housing units for the people that can work remotely that want to move there. And so we're seeing a lot of construction activity and investment in many smaller secondary, tertiary markets. And the biggest need they have, though, we're just underhoused as a country. I mean, we need probably about 4 million housing units, whether they're single family or multifamily. And so without those units, the supply and demand that we've talked about, there's not enough housing out there, and so housing options, and so prices are going up. We have, most product being built is market rate product because developers almost have to develop market rate in order to have a profit. The cost to build an apartment in the suburbs in Minneapolis, for example, is $200,000 to $225,000 a unit. In an urban area, it would probably be $275,000 to over $300,000, depending. And so it's an expensive proposition, and it's really gotten more so since the pandemic. Supply chain issues are impacting development. Developers have to go out 12 to 18 months now to get appliances for a building. So sometimes buildings are ready to be delivered to renters, but there's no appliances because we weren't anticipating the supply chain problems for appliances. Construction materials have the costs have increased pretty sharply, and so those things all work to, unfortunately, drive up rental rates. On the affordable side, there's a number of programs out there, and people are taking advantage of those programs because when most affordable properties open, there's a waiting list of people to go in, and they're filled, within a couple of weeks of delivery. But we're not really building for what I would call the missing middle of the population, because there aren't really subsidies, and I don't know if you need subsidies for it, or if cities and municipalities could waive some fees to make it a little bit more affordable. But when you look at about a $25,000 price difference between building market rate and what is generally called workforce housing, I mean, most people, usually both couples work or people in the building in the unit work, but with rental rates going up the way they are, it's difficult. And frankly, on the capital market side, with properties trading at 2 caps, which is a 2% cap rate, is really unheard of, and it's very difficult to make a profit there. And so, kind of like what the others said, we seem like we're really on an edge of what can you do to be profitable versus, you have this huge need out there, but developers aren't going to build if they can't make a profit. And so it's an interesting time in the market.
Well, that's certainly the case, Gina. Any question? And thank you for that. Any questions for Gina before we move on to our next speaker?
If not, I would just add that the low interest rates and massive amount of capital for multifamily has caused the price increases that we're seeing. Anything we can do to get new units delivered more quickly is helpful, but yeah, I'll stop.
Thank you very much, Governor Bowman.
Thank you, Vice Chair Clarida. Our next panelist is Mr. Larry Andrews. He's President and CEO of Massachusetts Growth Capital Corporation, or MGCC, whose mission is to create and preserve jobs at small businesses, women and minority-owned businesses, and to promote economic development in underserved gateway municipalities and low to moderate income communities. MGCC also administers the Small Business Technical Assistance Grant Program, which funds the delivery of technical assistance, training in business skills, and access to financing, fostering development and growth of businesses throughout the state. Larry, how have the small businesses you work with fared during the economic recovery? What are the concerns expressed by the businesses you engage with regarding their ability to continue operating? Are they able to hire or retain the employees that they need to operate their businesses?
Thank you, Governor Bowman and Chairman Powell, Vice Chair Clarida. Just amazing that you have this ability to listen, especially during this time, and other governors that are on the line, and especially those that are listening online, because what the Federal Reserve has done and continue to just thank you for your support as we look at the economic effects of COVID and to implement support for those most affected. I do also want to locally thank the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, especially Praval Chakrabarti and Carmen Pinakopoulos for their really unwielding support for under-resourced communities throughout New England. Personally, they're a source of guidance and factual support in addressing economic need. As we all know, economics is a team sport, and getting people engaged in helpful behavior and getting them off the sideline is difficult. But my experience with working cities with the Federal Reserve laid the groundwork for establishing trusted relationships and very valued relationships and partners, which helped me, especially as we look to serve small businesses during COVID. That investment by the Federal Reserve in those partnerships really laid the groundwork for what we've been able to do at Mass Growth Capital, which was through Governor Baker providing funds. We were able to fund $750 million to 15,000 businesses, a majority being minority-owned, women-owned, LGBTQ veterans, and those with physical disabilities. And that really was a way in which we knew that things are different. And we know that COVID has hit businesses differently, some because of industry segments, some because of location, some because of mandates. But we know that most that have been affected have been issues that were prevalent prior to COVID, specifically systematic racial economic inequality. 4 words that describe a generational and historic complex condition of our country with a dark root in money that needs to be undone. Those that live on the poverty line, and that continues, as we've heard from other panelists, that line continues to widen. Immigrant-owned businesses that have language and cultural barriers that are in under-resourced communities, and those that are physically impaired, and then others that are LGBTQ plus, veteran-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, and those located in gateway cities. Much of what we've heard already. All these groups have some intersectionality, but all have an experience that is vastly different than the majority. This has been borne out time and time again with Federal Reserve Small Business Studies, and most recently with a study conducted by the Coalition for an Equitable Economy, which was actually formed during COVID in Massachusetts and with Mass Inc. It's a very different experience for those communities. And yet, in light of that, and as Chairman Powell first started, the resiliency of small businesses throughout Massachusetts is just remarkable. And yet we do know that there continues to be some issues, and many of we've talked about already. Employee and workforce development. I had breakfast yesterday with a landscaping company, Jeff Dodge. He said, it's time that we spent as much time thinking about marketing that we start thinking about retaining and attracting new employees. That's something I think pre-COVID, we talked a lot about marketing, but not necessarily our employees. Landlords and rents, which have been talked about, the unwillingness and understandably so of landlords with their commitments of helping small businesses through this difficult time. I'd like to highlight the supply chain. That has been just something we've heard. I just finished a 25 city and town throughout Massachusetts visits and roundtables with the Secretary of Economic Affairs, Mike Keneally, and the supply chain issue continues to just elude many. Cafe El Dorado in Chelsea, predominantly Hispanic community. Jenny and Carlos started their bakery and cafe, and she talked to me about a carton of eggs pre-COVID of $8.99 for a carton. It's now $39 for a carton of eggs. Sunny Vu restaurant in Worcester, talking about fry oil. A 5-gallon jug of fry oil previous to COVID was $17, and now it's $50 if you can get it. And so in these communities in which there is no really price elasticity for many of their customers, how do you actually pass on these costs? The other thing is housing. We talked about it, and I'm so glad this is so crucial. There's a housing crisis at all levels, affordable, moderate. The housing crisis is affecting our businesses. We talked about digital divide, and that's not only access but also knowledge, and making sure that those businesses have the ability to go into the internet. And then childcare. Again, this is something that is exacerbated by COVID, and having places in which employees can bring their children. And just
Larry, if I could just ask you to wrap up. We're short on time, and then we'd like to try to get to all of our panelists before our deadline. So just some closing comments, and then I'll ask Vice Chair Clarida to introduce our next panelist.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you. And the other thing is I just hope that, we're known as a guiding generation as we look at racial inequality and climate change and pathways for immigrant businesses, and really writing a new path for economic success as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Just looking for the mute button. Our next speaker is Dr. Chad Mutray, who is Chief Economist at the National Association of Manufacturers, where he serves as the lead economic forecaster and spokesperson on economic issues. In addition, he is director of the Center for Manufacturing Research at the Manufacturing Institute, which is a social impact arm of the NAM. And he leads efforts there to produce thought leadership data and analysis to business leaders. Chad, please tell us what you see as the most consequential supply chain bottlenecks affecting U.S. manufacturers at this moment. How and when do you think these pressures will begin to ease? In which industries are in inventories particularly low? And is this due mainly to supply or demand factors? Finally, how concerned are manufacturers today about rising input costs?
중요한 이야기 없는 것 같아요. 딱히 여러 경제 전반적인 부분들을 이해하는 데는 도움이 될 것 같은데.
We can't hear you.
Manufacturers, as you know, are experiencing really strong demand, both in the U.S. and globally. And in fact, in the most recent NAM Manufacturers Outlook survey, 87.5% of respondents said that they were positive about their company's outlook. And while that's down from where it was 3 months ago, which was a 3-year high, it's still a pretty healthy figure. At the same time, manufacturing leaders cited rising raw material costs as their top concern for the third straight quarter, followed closely by the challenges of attracting and retaining a quality workforce, as was mentioned, supply chain disruptions, and the logistics and transportation issues. Interestingly, I asked many of these manufacturers what is the top downside risk to their forecast, right? It's a pretty rosy forecast. And yet the number one issue that they said was their top downside risk was workforce shortages. That was closely followed by some issues I would have thought, actually, supply chain disruptions, cost pressures, and the continued spread of COVID-19, including the Delta variant. On the labor front, manufacturing respondents had the highest expected growth rates for employment and wage growth in the survey's history, which dates to 1997, further highlighting the difficulties in obtaining sufficient workers. Indeed, as you know from the JOLTS data, we have 889,000 job openings in manufacturing right now, an all-time high. Specific to your question, while manufacturing growth remains solid, supply chain bottlenecks are significant, as Larry just noted earlier, holding back even stronger expansions in the sector. Manufacturers continue to cite backlogs of cargoes at the ports, the shortage of truck drivers, and soaring shipping costs as significant impediments. In a just-in-time production environment, this poses a very serious challenge to production and capacity, and quite frankly, the shortage of workers doesn't help that conversation either. While there's been a lot made of the chip shortage in the automotive sector, it is important to note that chips are not just in autos, and you're seeing these shortages impact other segments of the manufacturing sector as well. Certainly if you're a consumer, you've seen this as well, for appliances, electrical equipment, electronics, machinery, and others. Inventory shortages also go beyond motor vehicles, with inventory to sales ratios and very low actually for chemicals, metals, miscellaneous durable goods, and natural gas. Prices for metals, which I continue to hear about from our members all the time, are often cited as a challenge for manufacturers, the result of reduced capacity, both in the US and abroad, combined with very strong demand. These supply chain and logistical issues are likely to extend into next year from the conversations that I've had with manufacturers. It'll take a while, for instance, for the backlog at the ports to work its way through the system, something that's going to be exacerbated by the holiday season and everyone trying to get stuff on the shelves for Christmas and Hanukkah. In addition to that, you also have a lot of other structural hurdles to work through, including the tight labor market, as was mentioned, and the need by just about every sector to find enough workers. This is leading to wage pressures, which companies are pushing up compensation as they're trying to find enough talent to compete. While pricing pressures are likely to stabilize as we move into 2022, assisted by a more favorable base comparison, as you know, it is clear that some of these costs are going to remain pretty elevated relative to pre-pandemic levels, including wages. Once they go up, they are not likely to go back down, and also transportation costs. And core inflation is likely to be a lot hotter than we become accustomed to. Well, with that in mind, it is perhaps not surprising that so many manufacturers cited that as their top concern, really for all of this year so far. Moving forward, manufacturers will closely watch the price and economic growth data, much like you are, to see what develops. They are cautiously optimistic that supply chain disruptions and inventory issues will improve by mid-2022, with demand continuing to remain strong. Of course, it is also important to note, and we haven't really mentioned it today, the vaccines are important to this conversation as well. I think as we think about whatever that new normal looks like, it's important for us to all be vaccinated, and that certainly is something that the NAM, the National Association of Manufacturers, has been pushing for pretty aggressively over the course of this year.
Chad, thank you for that. As with all the panelists, we could spend a lot more time on that, but in the interest of time, I will hand it off to Governor Bowman. But thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Clarida. Our final panelist is Dr. William Hite. He serves as the superintendent of the School District of Philadelphia, and he's been in that role since 2012. Dr. Hite's career in education has included roles at every level of schooling from K through 12, as teacher, principal, central office administrator, and a superintendent. Bill, could you share with us what the biggest challenges you faced with the start of the 2021 academic school year? What have been the most concerning impacts on students from last year's disruptions to in-school education? And among what age groups and or socioeconomic groups are these impacts most acute? And finally, what adjustments do you believe educators will need to make to address the gaps in learning that have occurred?
Thank you, Governor Bowman, and good morning, everyone. And I don't know if there's enough time to respond to each one of those questions, but I'll try to work them through as quickly as possible. And so, first and foremost, the largest challenge that we face was the fact that many of our young people were out of school or not in person and were engaged in virtual learning for 18 months. And so now we have been back in school for 4 weeks, and we're very excited about that. But in a city like Philadelphia and many of the urban centers around the nation, what we have seen is that COVID and the consequences from COVID have exacerbated many of the inequities and disparities that persist in cities like ours. And we have concentrations of poverty in many areas of our city. And quite frankly, when we first went out, because of the pandemic, we had to make sure we were doing things like other panelists talked about, providing children with meals. Some 11 million meals were distributed just so that our young people could eat. We provided families with medications for their students who no longer had access to those medications. We then had to move to a virtual platform, but unfortunately, well, first and foremost, not all of our students had access to the technology. So then we had to make sure everyone had access to the technology and purchase some 90,000 pieces of technology to distribute. Then we discovered not everyone had access to reliable and high-functioning internet services. And so then working with Comcast and the city and other philanthropic organizations in Philadelphia, we were able to provide that for a 2-year period. Now that we have young people back into schools, we've had to really be focused on many of the social and emotional aspects that many of our young people have experienced as a part of their isolation, the trauma associated with that. And then in addition to that, one thing that we weren't anticipating, and we knew we were going to have challenges with, let's say, bus drivers and transportation, and no matter where you are in the country, you're seeing those challenges. What we didn't anticipate were all of the other supply chain challenges that are a product of not having enough workers or drivers, and those things then impacted our ability to pick up trash, to pick up trash bins, to have food delivered to schools. Yesterday we had one school had 2 of their cafeteria workers who did not report, and so therefore the school didn't have access to the meals that were available in the kitchen because those 2 individuals did not report to work. And so it's those types of things that are really beginning to impact. And as educators who have been flexible throughout this entire pandemic, one of the things that many individuals are doing now is really finding new ways to engage with young people while also trying to manage their own emotions and their own traumas as a result of the pandemic, as well as the emotions and challenges and trauma of our young people. And I'll just add this, Governor Bowman, is that when you have those types of supply chain types of challenges, let's say you can't get children picked up on a bus, the impact of that challenge is disproportionate to those who are already in deep poverty. And because when those children don't have access to transportation, they can't get to school. And when those young people are at schools where we don't have access to meals or food to distribute, then those families or children don't eat. And so the disparities and income disparities and all of the other disparities as it relates to access to healthcare and nutrition, all of those things are exacerbated as a part of the pandemic and what we have been trying to navigate as a result.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your perspectives with all of these very critical and important issues that affect our workers. But I do want to just let Chair Powell wrap up our conversation today if he has the time to do so. So thank you so much for your perspective.
I do have time, and thank you so much for this. You know, we are really living in unique times. I'm old enough to have seen a lot of things, but I've never seen these kind of supply change issues. Never seen an economy that combines, drastic labor shortages with lots of unemployed people and a lot of slack in the labor market. As you were just pointing out, one part of it is not so different from other downturns, and that is people with the least resources, least able to bear the burden, were particularly hard hit by this one. So it's a very fast changing economy. It's going to be quite different from the one we hear that right across the board from many of you, and to hear this, for us to be able to hear this from you in real time is enormously valuable. We get tons and tons of data here, but it doesn't really live for us until we hear your stories and what's really going on the ground. So again, we're out of time, but I just want to thank you personally so much for this, and we'll hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yep.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
끝.
Bye.
끝. 딱히 글쎄요. 중요한 이야기는 없네요. 뭔가 좀, 중요한 이야기, 오늘은 정리를 안 해도 될 것 같다는 생각이 들고요. 그냥 간단하게 정리를 해볼게요. 이미 파월이 한 이야기지만, 가격 압박, 있지만 이건 뭐 파월이 얘기한 거 아니에요. 파월이 이야기한 게 아니라 참여자들이 이야기한 거. 참여자들이 이야기한 거. 오늘 제가 생각했던 Q&A가 아니네요. 예. 일단 첫 번째로 뭐 인플레이션 압박 있지만 뭐 내년 6월쯤에는 내년엔 나아질 것. 내년에는 나아질 것. 공급 부족 문제 내년까지 이어질 것. 팬미팅까지는 아니지만 이제 실질적 섹터에 있는 사람들에 대한 이야기는 우리가 사실상 매일매일 뉴스를 통해서 듣고 있어서 새로운 점이 있었다고 보기는 어렵네요. 네. 노동자 부족 문제는 경험 없는 사람들이 들어갈 곳이 부족하다. 사실상 좋은 대우를 원한다. 사실상 좋은 대우도 원하고. 예. 노동자 부족 문제는 경험 부족하다. 그리고 영화 인더스트리는 좋다. 이거 근데 사실상 생각해보니까 좋네요. 영화 인더스트리가 필름ing 인더스트리죠. 필름 인더스트리는 전체적으로 굉장히 좋은 모습을 보여주고 있대요. 팬미팅이요. 이제 팬들이 글쎄요, 한 10만은 찍어야 팬미팅 할 수 있지 않을까? 예, 10,000명다리가 팬미팅을 하기에는 아직 좀 부족하지 않나요? 예, 그러나 몇몇 연극이라든지 안 좋은 모습을 보여주는 것도 있다. 예. 학교 관련해서 국밥집 많이 가져가지고 국밥집 많이 가져. 그리고 또 뭐가 있었나? 근데 일단 제가 봤을 때 이거는 제 개인적인 의견이에요. 근데 일단 아까 그 다른 이야기도 있었는데 많은 사람들이 커리어 체인지를 원한다. 이게 좀 중요한 것 같아요. 원한다. 근데 경험과 스킬이 없는 사람들도 좋은 대우를 받고 싶어 해요. 왜냐? 지금 전체적으로 돈을 많이 받고 있으니까. 예. 많은 커리어 체인지를 원한다. 플러스 경험이 없다. 플러스 좋은 대우를 원한다가 합쳐져서 노동자 부족이 이어지는 듯. 저 순대국밥 좋아합니다. 네, 순대국밥 엄청 좋아해요. 네, 주식시장에는 영향이 없을 것 같아요. 뭐 일단 정리는 해드리겠지만 사실상 파월이 이야기한 것도 아니고 뭐 지나가는 회사원 A씨가 이야기한 이런 느낌이라서 좀 그리고 좀 중요한 이야기가 나왔는데 레스토랑 인더스트리의 시급이 18불이래요. 와, 미쳤네. 와, 레스토랑 시급이 18불이야? 시급이 최소 18불이에요. 최소. 와, 이거를 연봉으로 따지면 얼마지? 연봉으로 따지면 주급으로 따지면 40 곱하기 8 곱하기 18 5760 곱하기 52주. 뭐 내가 잘못 계산한 것 같은데? 잠깐만요. 18 곱하기 40 곱하기 52주. 4만 불 그렇게 높진 않네요. 네, 4만 불. 막 그렇게 높진 않네. 생각해보니까 팁도 있을 거고. 네, 저희 집이요? 네, 저희 집 어차피 뭐 18,000원이요. 8불 뭐 한 2만 얼마? 와, 많이 받네요. 근데 생각보다 진짜 많이 받네요. 약 4만 불. 4만 플러스 팁까지 합치면 뭐 한 4만 중반 정도 되겠죠? 일당 100만 원 정도요? 일당 100만 원 되면은 한 달에 3천만 원인데 한 달에 3만 불이면 아우. 근데 일단은 뭐 중요한 부분은 사실 이게 끝인 것 같아요. 뭐 딱히 뭐 중요한 부분이 오늘 있었다기보다는 그냥 간단하게 그냥 Q&A라고 해서 사실 저는 Q&A라고 해서 팁은 별도예요. 팁은 보통 별도입니다. 아, 킬리만조님 감사합니다. 아우, 제가 킬리만조님의 팬이죠. 와주셔서 제가 팬 되겠어요. 저는 Q&A가 파월이 질문을 받는 줄 알았는데 파월이 질문하는 거 있어. 아, 보통 팁은 캐시로 받아요. 캐시로 받는데 캐시는 보통 쉬쉬하죠. 제가 아는 친구는 미슐랭에서 웨이트 하는데 연봉 따지면 저보다 더 받아요. 미슐랭에서 웨이트는 1억 이상 받습니다. 연봉 1억 이상. 팁 포함. 연봉이 아니라 팁 포함. 그리고 그 뭐죠? 칵테일 바에서 이거 성능에 뭐라고 하지? 까먹었네. 그 뭐죠? 바텐더 진짜 돈 많이 벌어요. 괜찮은데. 팁 진짜 잘 받아요. 무튼 오늘 이야기는 다 끝났는데 한번 마지막으로 블룸버그나 보고 넘어갈까요? 뭔가 이렇게 끝내기 좀 아쉬운데 뭔가 제가 여러분들에게 좀 재밌고 유용한 정보를 드리고 싶었는데 사실상 오늘 정보가 뭐지 약간 이런 느낌이 들어가지고 일단 마지막으로 한번 블룸버그나 좀 넘고 짚고 넘어가도록 하죠. 말씀드렸지만 지금 암호화폐에 관해서 바이든이란다. 중국 정부가 굉장히 크랙다운을 하고 있어요. 결국 거의 모든 암호화폐 거래가 불법이라는 딱지를 붙이면서 아우 글쎄요. 그리고 뭐 중국 리스크가 계속해서 올라가고 있어가지고 그런지 헝다 때문입니다. 오늘 떨어지는 이유는 헝다 새끼 안 와. 아니 낸다며. 헝다야 돈 낸다더니 거짓말 쳤어. 헝다가 해결했다 그랬는데 국채 금리가 12배나 올랐다고요? 그거는 미쳤는데? 국채 금리가 12배나 올랐다고요? 그건 말도 안 되는데. 잠시만요. 한번 확인을 하고 갈게요. 일단은 팩트 체크 좀 하고 갈게요. 잠시만요. 프랑스 그렇게 많이 올랐나요? 잠시만요. 아직 제가 프랑스 쪽 금리를 보고 있는데 한 달짜리가 올랐네. 단기 금리가 엄청 올랐네요. 중요한 거 안 나왔어요. 이티팀 중요한 거 안 나왔고요. 사실상 그냥 고용 문제와 노동자 공급 문제와 그리고 원자재 공급 부족 문제에 대해서 이야기를 했고요. 중요한 부분에 대한 이야기는 없었어요. 오늘은 그냥 알던 부분들 짚고 넘어갔습니다. 프랑스 단기채 한 달짜리가 0.04%에서 0.037로 올랐네요. 감사합니다, 양이님. 아니, 이거 내려가는 거 아니야? 이거 내려간 0.004구나. 0.004. 감사합니다. 고양이님. 이름이 되게 너무 뭔가 되게 이쁘실 것 같네요. 고양이. 양이님, 뭔가 되게 뭐 그 동물과 비슷한 이름이시네요. 만나는 아메리카노 하나 사 먹도록 하겠습니다. 마시면서 피곤 풀도록 할게요. 음식값 기본 팁이 15%고요. 그럼 좀 잘했다. 그러면 18%. 예. 기본이 15%예요. 그러니까 너무 약간 못해도 웬만하면 15%는 줘요. 예. 어저께 제가 사실 배달 음식 시켜 먹는데 어떤 분이 배달하는데 팁을 제가 넣었거든요. 원래 배달 팁은 그렇게 많이는 안 줘요. 그냥 한 8%, 7% 주는데 갑자기 뭐 한 20% 팁을 달라 그래가지고 살짝 약간 이런 느낌인데 보통은 그렇게 배달 음식 그렇게까지 팁을 많이 주진 않고요. 예. 그러니까 저도 배달 음식은 원래 팁을 그러니까 기본적으로 하시는 분들이 힘들어하니까 주긴 하는데 갑자기 뭐 저도 달라고 해가지고 살짝 당황했던 기억이 나네요. 요리사들은 그 대신 주급을 많이 받죠. 예. 미슐랭이나 뭐 아니면 술집 같은 경우는 20, 30%도 줘요. 예. 그래서 바텐더가 돈을 잘 버는 거예요. 예. 팁 뒤에서 확인하고 쫓아서 나오죠. 팁을 덜 줬다? 이놈의 손님이 나한테 팁을 5%만 주고 가? 그럼 빡쳐서 달려와서 왜 팁 5%만 줬어? 라고 얘기하지. 보통 그래요. 네네. 저는 되게 사기 편하던데요. 예. 펠팍이나 포트리는 영어 못해도 상관없더라고요. 저도 에이다 물려가지고 근데 다스님 대단하시네. 45,000에서 숏을 치셨다니. 와 대단하시네요. 다스님 축하드려요. 지금 저도 에이다 물려있어요. 에이다 다시 물렸다. 네, 다시 평단가 밑으로. 다시 평단가 밑으로. 저도요. 버스는 팁 안 줘요. 버스는 버스값만 냅니다. 이게 조금 팁이라는 문화가 서비스에 관한 문화예요. 서비스를 받는다. 그럼 팁을 줍니다. 뭐 뉴저지는 기름을 넣어줘요. 제가 원래 나가서 셀프 서비스로 넣는 게 아니라 뉴저지는 법적으로 모든 주유소에서 고용인들이 있어가지고 직원들이 기름을 넣어줘야 되는데 그런 경우 한 1, 2불 정도 팁을 줘요. 안 줘도 돼요. 근데 안 줘도 돼. 선택전에 관해서. 예. 저 코인도 합니다. 코인 하는데 많이는 안 해요. 코인을 하긴 하는데 주식이나 부동산만큼 하지는 않습니다. 일단은 전 기본적으로 모든 거를 다 하긴 해요. 맞아요. 예. 카사바 사이언스 왜 이러냐? 카사바 사이언스 64불 찍었네요. 깜짝이야. 카사바 사이언스 64불? 뭐지? 갑자기 너무 올랐네요. 저도 살짝 당황스럽네. 옷이 투명하다고요? 저 옷 투명하지 않은데요? 그래요? 요즘에 항상 TMV 잘 사신 것 같아요. 사실 TMV를 아마 테이퍼링 전에 사셨으면 좋았을 거 더 많이 이득을 보셨을 것 같은데 테이퍼링 실제로 시행하게 되면은 아마 더 오를 거란 생각이 들긴 합니다. 선물 채권은 안 합니다. 선물과 채권과 금은은 너무 몰라요. 네. 제가 아는 분야가 제로예요. 제로. 제가 생각해보고 싶긴 한데 네네. 그 대신에 팁을 주면 진짜로 잘 해줘요. 개인적으로 제가 뭐 예를 들어서 레스토랑에 가서 아는 웨이터가 보여요. 그 친구 아는테 제가 막 팁을 한 20%는 주거든요. 그러면 확실히 막 서비스로 음식도 나오는 경우도 있고 막 그 친구가 굉장히 잘 해주면서 서비스의 질이 좋아지긴 합니다. 네. 확실히 뭐 한국이야 뭐 모든 사람들이 잘해주겠지만 뭐 미국 같은 경우는 확실히 팁을 주는 거에 따라서 서비스 정도가 달라집니다. 마진이 막혔나요? 마진은 안 막혔는데 그래요? 저 같은 경우는 팁은 웬만하면 캐시로 주고 있고요. 왜냐면은 카드로 주면은 세금 떼갑니다. 카드로 주면은 세금 떼가고 캐시를 쓰면은 당연히 뭐 모든 걸 리포팅하지는 않겠죠. 미국 이게 미국 내 팁 문화에 대해서 조금 더 얘기를 하자면 제가 옛날에 레스토랑에서 웨이터로 일한 적이 있는데 레스토랑에서 웨이터로 일할 때 경력에 따라서 팁을 퍼센티지를 줘요. 한국 음식점들은 한국 음식점들이 조금 약간 기본급을 따로 주고요. 그 다음에 팁을 경력에 따라서 나눠 갔습니다. 웬만하면 저는 팁을 잘 주고 있어요. 뭐 실질적으로 뭐 제가 유튜브를 하고 있기도 하고 제가 옛날에 웨이터를 대학교 때 하긴 했었거든요. 대학교 때 웨이터를 하다 보니까 제가 거기가 얼마나 힘든지도 알고 박봉이 될 수도 있다는 걸 알아가지고 그래서 웬만하면 팁은 잘 주는 편이에요. 당연히 맥도날드 같은 데서는 안 줍니다. 맥도날드 같이 왜냐면은 그러니까 레스토랑에서 팁을 주는 기준이 그 사람이 나한테 음식을 내 식탁에 갖다 줬는가 내 식탁에 음식을 갖다 준다 팁 안 갖다 준다 노팁. 요즘 노팁 레스토랑도 늘고 있어요. 요즘 노팁 레스토랑도 늘고 있는 추세입니다. 뉴욕에 맨하타라는 곳이 있어요. 맨하타라는 곳이 있는데 여기 진짜 괜찮아요. 데이트하기 진짜 좋은 곳입니다. 제가 제 비밀 스팟 공개하는 거예요. 뉴욕에 맨하타라는 곳이 있는데 여기는 다 서빙해주고 고층 레스토랑인데 쌉니다. 가격도 좋아요. 서빙 기계 아직 없습니다. 키오스크는 있긴 있는데 다 서빙해주고 고치는 가격도 좋아요. 근데 여기 진짜 괜찮아요. 노팁 진짜 괜찮아. 이게 어떤 마인드냐면은 노팁하는 맨하타예요. 맨하타. 나중에 한번 가보세요. 맨하타. 이걸 거야 아마. 음식 맛있더라고요. 코인으로 팁 결제하는 시스템이 생겼다고 듣긴 들었는데 좋습니다 여기. 근데 여기 클로즈는 해. 지금 일시적 닫았네요. 지금 코로나 때문에 닫았네요. 여기 진짜 좋은데 여기 닫았는데 저도 방금 찾아봤는데 닫았네요. 제가 나중에 여기 데이트 스팟이랑 좀 좋은데도 좀 알려드리고 할게요. 왜 이렇게 스팸이 많이 주냐. 미용실은 보통 한 팁을 한 20-30%는 주는 것 같아요. 저는 후터스를 가본 적이 없어요. 저는 진짜로 저는 후터스를 가본 적이 없습니다. 아쉽게도. 블룸에너지요? 처음 들어보는 회사입니다. 블룸에너지 처음 들어보는 회사이고요. 후터스는 아닌데 서부 쪽에도 후터스랑 비슷한 데가 있어요. 그때는 제가 제가 일하는 동료들이 그 후터스랑 비슷한 데를 데리고 간 적 있어요. 아뜰리어 좋죠. 아뜰리어 좋죠. 후터스 여자친구 있는 입장에서 후터스 가면 큰일 나죠. 후터스 가면 큰일 나요. 여러분 후터스가 뭔지 모르시는 분들을 위해서 후터스는 야시시한 복장을 입으신 분들이 서빙해 주는 곳입니다. 이상한 데는 아니에요. 이상한 데는 아니에요. 데니스는 팁 줘야 돼. 데니스 팁 줘야죠. 데니스는 팁 줘야 됩니다. 서빙을 해주잖아요. 그러면은 팁을 줘야 돼요. 네. 한인 헤어샵 중에도 굉장히 뭐 어리신 분들이 요즘 새로운 트렌드에 맞춰서 하시는 곳도 있고요. 좀 비싸죠. 그런 데는 좀 비싸고요. 좀 나이 드신 분들이 약간 뭐라고 하죠? 헤어샵 중에서도 뭐 그 뭐라고 하죠? 옛날 미용실이 아니라 뭐라고 하지? 아, 이발소 같은 곳은 이발소 같은 곳은 예, 상당히 뭐 가격이 싸죠. 네. 저는 미용실 가격이 한 30불인데 팁 한 20불 줍니다. 15, 20불? 아, 제가 블룸 에너지를 몰라요. 제가 원래 모든 섹터를 다 아는 건 아니니까. 네. 실라이브 할 수 있는 것 같아요. 네, 제가 최근에 저희 아버지가 거기서 자르셨던 것 같습니다. 네. 아, 진짜요? 아하. 뭐 한인 미용실 저는 솔직히 제가 머리를 맨날 밀었었거든요. 맨날 밀다가 제가 원래 잠시만요. 요거를 보고 제가 한번 제 옛날 사진이 있으려나? 찾아보면 옛날 사진이 있을 것 같긴 한데 제가 원래 머리를 밀었어요. 옛날에는 머리를 밀고 그랬는데 사실 이렇게까지 머리가 긴 적이 별로 없습니다. 원래 많이 미는 편입니다. 옛날 사진이 없네. 업스타트요? 업스타트도 들어봤죠. 업스타트는 저도 잘 모르겠어요. 업스타트는 뭐 저도 투자하는 분야만 알다 보니까 요즘 그 뭐죠? 디지털 터바인, 앱스, 터바인 쪽 공부를 좀 하고 있긴 해요. 입니다. 이쪽 섹터가 생각보다 요즘 핫하다는 이야기를 들어가지고 디지털 터바인 쪽 공부를 하고 있는데 앱스죠, 앱스. 앱스 쪽 공부를 하고 있는데 아직 좀 부족해서 여러분들하고 쉐어는 안 하고 있어요. 제가 좀 하다가 좀 더 요거는 좀 여러분들하고 같이 쉐어해도 좋을 것 같다 라고 할 때는 많이 얘기를 해보도록 할게요. 페이팔 진짜 많이 씁니다. 페이팔 저 매일 써요. 매일 씁니다. 마트몰은 당연히 한국보다 비싸죠. 비쌉니다. 쌀 수가 없어요. 싸기가 쉽지가 않고요. 제 옛날에 머리를 밀었을 때가 있었을 텐데 사진이 없네. 페이팔 마피아요? 네, 그럴 리가 있나요? 네, 그럴 리가 있나. 월급에는 기본기 플러스 팁이죠. 네. 전 박사 아닙니다. 뭐 상관없어요. 네, 저는 뭐 애초에 제가 쓴 글 뭐 다들 퍼가시기 해놔서 개인적으로는 출전은 써주셨으면 좋죠. 출전은 써주시면 저야 좋죠. 근데 뭐 틀린 부분도 있어요. 저는 뭐 틀린 부분도 있고 해서 뭐 제가 퍼가는데 딱히 막지는 않기 때문에 뭐 혹시 봐주시면은 출점만 달아주세요라고 적어주세요. 뭐 딱히 뭐 그게 제가 뭐 퍼가는데 딱히 막지는 않죠. 몇 번 군대에서 봤는데 굳이 제가 뭐 사실 뭐 제가 애널리스트 전문가도 아니고 해서 뭐 제가 쓴 글에 대해서 아직 뭐 저작권 같은 것도 있는 것은 아니라서 나중에 보시면은 출처만 적어주세요 라고 적어주시면 땡큐죠. 옛날에 찍었던 게 있을 텐데 큐큐큐요. 드디어 오르나요? 와하하. 제 옛날 사진이 있을 텐데. 저는 벤모가 원래 근데 페이팔이에요. 아시죠? 벤모가 페이팔입니다. 페이팔. 네. 그리고 젤레라고 해서 이게 은행끼리 거래할 때 많이 쓰죠. 할 때 많이 씁니다. 정비소는 전 팁 안 줍니다. 정비소는 팁 주는 사람도 있다고 하는데 너무 돈을 이미 많이 냈는데 근데 더 주진 않아요. 정유 섹터가 계속해서 이어지고 있는 걸로 저도 보여요. 저도 보이고 있는데 쉽지 뭐랄까요? 대머리 때 사진이 있으려나? 여기 있다. 대머리 때 사진. 잠시만요. 네, 제 대머리 때 사진입니다. 대머리 때 사진. 어때요? 예, 이게 제 대머리 때 사진이에요. 원래 머리 이렇게 짧게 유지하고 다녔습니다. 제 머리가 이랬어요. 예, 개인적으로 매출 성장은 이제 페이팔하고 젤레, 벤모, 스퀘어에서 정리되는 순입니다. 예. 한창 때죠. 네, 이랬다가 지금은 머리 열심히 길러서 여자친구가 저런 머리 하면 죽여버린다고 했기 때문에 이제 안 합니다. 살이 쪘어요. 살이 말씀드렸잖아요. 살이 50kg 정도 쪘어요. 쪘습니다. 50kg는 아니고 한 40kg 조금 안 되게 38kg 쪘네요. 38kg 정도 쪘네. 저 때에 비해서. 그런가요? 다행이네요. 뭐죠? 테슬라요? 저는 잠시만요. 테슬라 한번 보고 가죠. 테슬라 들어가서 보고 테슬라 뉴스 같은 게 있는가? German will fuel competition. Can move over. Casio does is losing motor buy right now. Selling Tesla. 오늘 가격은 좋아 보이는데. 오늘 계속 오르는데 오르는 이유에 테슬라가 칩 부족 문제가 뭐 단기적 문제라고 이야기를 하기도 했고, 내년에는 끝날 거라고 공언했다고 하네요. 테슬라 일론 머스크가 내년에는 새로운 반도체 공장들이 생겨서 전 세계적인 문제를 끝낼 거라는 식으로 이야기를 했다고 해요. 네, 여자친구가 저 살찐 거 몰라요. 네, 저요? 저는 저항선 같은 것도 보긴 하지만 저 같은 경우는 솔직히 저항선보다는 무빙 에버리지랑 RSI 같은 지표를 더 많이 보긴 해요. 뭐 단기적인 악재나 장기적인 악재도 보는 편이고요. 저 같은 경우는 전에 한번 이야기했던 분이 있는데 코테가와라고 해서 그분이 하려고 했던 부분들을 실험적으로는 해보고 있긴 하는데 제가 지표 쪽 분석에는 그렇게 자신이 있지 않기 때문에 많은 다른 분들이 분석해주는 거 많이 보는 편입니다. 네. 아니 그게 아니라 여자친구랑 통화할 때 항상 이렇게 위에 두고 얼짱각도에서 통화를 합니다. 네. 제가 이거 트레이딩 뷰라고 좋은 웹사이트가 있어요. 제가 분석을 못해도 남들이 분석을 해주는 그런 데가 있습니다. 트레이딩 뷰 들어가시면 여기서 트레이딩 뷰라는 곳이 있는데 여기 들어가시면 여기서 만약에 내가 뭘 찾고 싶다. 뭐 트레이딩 뷰 깜짝이야. 여기서 아이디어 들어가셔서 뭐 검색이 왜 안 되냐? 잠시만요. 검색해야 되는데. 잠시만요. 트레이딩 뷰를 아예 검색을 해서 들어가자. 이렇게 들어간 적이 없어가지고. 잠시만요. 차트 들어가서 이건 이항 차트네. 한번 좀 다른 거 차트를 들고 와볼게요. 트레이딩 뷰 뭐 예를 들어서 뭐 이항 찾아봅시다. 이항 들어가면은 이런 식으로 들어가서 아예 테크니컬한 부분들을 찾아볼 수가 있어요. 이렇게 테크니컬한 부분들을 보면서 무빙 에버리지라든지 아니면 서머리라든지 오실레이터라든지 그런 것들을 볼 수도 있기도 하고요. 그리고 여기 들어가시면 커뮤니티 탭에 들어가시면은 사실 좀 더 많은 걸 아이디어를 들어가면은 여기 많은 분들이 다른 분석을 해놓은 게 있어요. 지표 분석. 예, 여기 보시면은 많은 분석을 해놓은 게 있는데 이런 거 보면은 여기 언제쯤 사라 언제쯤 팔라 이런 걸 보면서 프리미엄이나 프로페셔널이나 리뷰가 좋은 친구들 위주로 봅니다. 프리미엄 뭐 이런 애들 위주로 보면 되는데 유료인 부분도 있고 무료인 부분도 있습니다. 보통 이런 아이디어 같은 부분은 무료가 많아요. 무료가 많은데 이렇게 차트 분석을 대신해주는 사람들이 있어서 예. 순위가 높은 순위요? 글쎄요. 그렇다게까지는 제가 찾아보질 않아서 저 같은 경우는 이 사람이 썼던 거를 보면서 근거가 있냐 없냐를 많이 봐주는 중이고 팔로워들도 있고요. 팔로워 숫자도 보고 그러면서 레퓨테이션도 있고요. 그런 거를 보는 편이라서 네네. 팔로워들이 있습니다. 팔로워들 위주로 여기 트레이딩 뷰 내에 커뮤니티가 생성이 되어 있는 편이기 때문에 네. 그래가지고 아이 감사합니다. 저는 집이 가격이 조금 떨어지고 있다고 좀 생각을 했었거든요. 뭐 저쪽 지역하고 이쪽 지역하고 좀 느끼는 부분이 다를 수 있지만 저는 집 가격 관련해서 요즘 조금 횡보하고 있다는 느낌이 좀 크고 하락장에 올 수도 있겠다는 생각을 했었는데 뭐 그쪽 분이 전문가분이시잖아요. 전문가분이 이야기하셨을 때 이야기하신 부분이 집 가격 상승이 계속되고 있다. 계속해서 오르고 있다. 공급이 부족하고 수요가 많다라는 부분을 계속해서 지적해 주셨는데 예, 그런 부분들 관련해서 예, 좀 더 이야기를 해야겠다. 좀 더 뭔가 생각을 해봐요. 원래 이번 주 주말에 이 부분에 대해서 이야기를 해보려고 생각을 하고 있었거든요. 그래가지고 좀 고민을 하고 있었는데, 글쎄요. 쉽지가 않네요. 하여간, 아이고. 지금 집 가격 관련해서 제가 생각했던 장하고 이제 실질적으로 저 마켓의 전문가분이 이야기하신 부분하고 좀 달라가지고 제이님이 근데 주신 거 아유 감사합니다. 아닙니다. 슈퍼챗 안 주셔도 참석해주는 것만으로 진짜 너무 감사드려요. 저는 말씀드렸지만 애초에 유튜브를 돈 벌려고 하는 사람이 아니라 말씀드렸지만 저는 유튜브를 여러분들과 즐겁게 이야기하면서 경제에 대해서 배워가면서 주식에 대해서 배워가면서 유튜브를 하는 사람이기 때문에 애초에 저도 많이 틀리기도 하고요. 그래서 여러분들하고 같이 이야기를 하면서 즐겁게 이야기하기 때문에 참가해 주시는 것만으로 전 진짜 너무 감사드립니다. 제이님 주신 돈으로 맛있는 점심 사 먹도록 할게요. 네. 그러게요. 일단 테슬라가 뭐 계속해서 뭐 오르고 있는데 딱히 뭔 호재가 있는지는 나와 있지는 않아가지고 없는데 많은 분들이 루시드 들고 있으니까 루시드에 관한 것도 좀 찾아보죠. 뭐 루시드 모터가 살만하냐 520 마일 per charge가 나왔는데 살만하냐라는 부분에 대해서 이야기가 나와 있는데 저는 pace they're delivering lucid air 2021년 말에 루시드 모터가 배달을 할 것이라고 예상되고 있다고 하네요. 루시드 모터가 장투로는 좋아 보인다고 적혀 있네요. 여기. Shares are far from proper buy point. 근데 지금 당장은 사지 말라고 되어 있네. Shares of Lucid are far from a proper buy point. 사지 말라고 적혀 있네요. 떨어지면 사래요. 그렇게 나와있어요. 딱 숏롱님이 말씀하신 대로 팔리는 거 보고 들어가라라는 식으로 되어 있는데 일단 기본적으로 딥을 하면은 그때 사라고 적혀 있네요. 아, 니콜라요? 니콜라 한번 봐볼까요? 니콜라. 오, 니콜라 좋은 모습 보여주고 있는데 딱히 뭐 새로운 뉴스도 없는데 니콜라는 뉴스도 없네요. 뭔가 뉴스가 있어야 오르던 말던 하는데 계속해서 그래도 계속해서 우상향하고 있네요. 오, 야, 모습 좋은데? 와우. 저점 찍고 나서 계속해서 그 저점에서 뭐 지하실 한번 뚫긴 했지만 그 이후로는 계속해서 상승해주고 있네요. 막 뉴스가 뭐 새로운 게 보이지는 않습니다. 한번 Sex Analyst 블로그 하이라이트를 한번 봐보죠. EV Adoption Story Continue. Alien Holdings, Nikola Group, Commercialized Battery BEV Fuel Cell Electric Class A Short-Term, Medium, Long-Haul Truck Sector and Welfare. 이번 쿼터 동안 16% 상승할 걸로 예상되어 있고요. 그러니까 어닝이 이 어닝이 16% 상승할 걸로 보이고요. 그리고 Industry Project Decline 38.7%, Revised 18.5% upward over 60 days. Buy Rating이라고 되어 있네요. 이 애널리스트가 쓴 글에 의하면 이번 쿼터 동안 성장할 확률이 18% 성장할 것으로 예정이 된다고 하네요. 니콜라는 뭐 일단 한번 공매도를 크게 맞았고 사실 실적으로 뭐 문제가 한번 있었던 곳이라 글쎄요. 니콜라 쪽은 제가 사실 좀 크게 관심이 없었던 부분들이 많아가지고 한번 좀 보긴 봐야 될 것 같아요. 제가 봤을 때 중국 문제가 한번 일단 블룸버그를 보고 넘어가도록 하죠. 블룸버그에서 어떤 뉴스가 있었나. 일단 제가 한 5분에서 10분 정도 있으면은 끄긴 꺼야 될 것 같은데 이건 뭐지? 잠시만요. 이거 좀 중요한데? 블룸버그에서
Republicans or Democrats to join major trade agreements, I think has something to do with that as well. So yeah, I think this adds up to a slightly less globalized era when it comes to trade and investment. And we've been riding global trade and investment. It has contributed to high
전
rates
이
of growth,
블룸버그요
of
비싸죠.
economic
전
growth.
뭐
It's
블룸버그
not a
비싼데
switch. It
뭐
doesn't go
유튜브
away,
하니까
but I
그냥
think
쓰고
it
있습니다.
probably flattens the curve a little bit, David.
Richard, finally, I want to take advantage of your expertise because you've had high positions in government and foreign policy, both at the National Security Council, also at the State Department. We're watching the Biden administration now. I think it's fair to say struggle a bit. I won't say stumble, but struggle certainly. They've had a rough couple of weeks here. Give us a sense of when it's just this is par for the course. You have a new administration. You're going to have some things come up you don't expect. It's going to be hard. As opposed to saying, you know what, maybe we have to rethink the way we're doing this. Maybe we need to rethink the team or the processes that we're using.
이 사람이 바이든의 중국적 어드바이저라고 얘기를 하는데
stumbles, whatever word you want to call it, early on. It can be dramatic. The Kennedy administration, for example, with the Bay of Pigs fiasco. This administration's had some real problems early on in Afghanistan. And then subsequently with the submarine deal with France.
다들 채팅창 서로를 존중해 주시길 바랍니다. 프로님, 다른 분들도 존중해 주시면서 이야기 부탁드려요. 일단 지금 당연히 다른 분들 각자의 생각이 있을 거고 서로 이야기할 때 서로 존중하면서 서로 이야기하면서 집단 지성을 창출하는 걸로 이야기를 합시다. 다들 즐겁게 이야기를 하기를 바라요. 저는 다들
do a postmortem, figure out what went wrong, and fix it.
Richard, I wonder if you have any sense at all. I understand you're not on the inside now, but any sense at all? Are these problems they knew were coming up and they made the conscious decision to take the hit, whatever the hit was, or the things they didn't know about? When I was running a business, I really differentiate between those two things. It's one thing to know I've got the problem and say, I've just got to take the hit, I'm willing to do it. It's another thing to be surprised by it.
I think there's a difference between the two. Say with Afghanistan, I think people were genuinely surprised, and that's a good case where if you assume away problems, you're not prepared for them. And I think they thought it would be a smooth and easy, they had time on their hands, process of withdrawal. They simply assumed away what clearly was not the case. I think
지금 계속 보면은 저작권 때문에 제 영상이 잘릴 것 같아서 일단 이거 끌게요. 지금 뭐야? 쿠오모 앤드류 쿠오모의 동생 있죠? 앤드류 쿠오모도 한마디로 성추문 사건으로 지금 사퇴했는데 CNN의 프라임타임 호스트 크리스 쿠오모의 동생도 같이 성추문으로 하차할 위기에 놓였네요. 네. 감사합니다, 이준님. 근데 장난이 아니고, 근데 사실 저는 뭐 아시다시피 저는 갈등을 그렇게 좋아하진 않아요. 뭐 갈등이 생겼을 때 피하는 성격은 아닌데, 그렇다고 해서 뭐 제가 굳이 많은 사람들이 서로의 각자의 비전이 있고 각자의 비전에 맞춰서 서로의 의견을 이야기하는 거는 굉장히 좋다고 생각합니다. 서로의 의견을 많이 이야기하고, 뭐 예를 들어서 킹프로님이 말씀하신 떨어질 거라는 부분에 대해서 왜 떨어지는지 좀 이야기를 해주시고 저희 킹프로님의 비전을 공유해 주셔서 너무 감사드리지만 그런 부분에 대해서 조금 더 논리적으로 이야기해 주시고 저희가 알아들을 수 있게 이야기해 주시면 그게 좀 더 좋은 결과를 갖고 올 수 있을 거라고 생각해요. 다른 분들도 똑같고요. 진짜 모든 사람들 다 포함해서요. 진짜 말씀드렸지만 뭐 우리가 이야기할 때 저도 최대한 말씀드리지만 저도 말씀드릴 때 이건 제 개인적인 생각입니다 라면 항상 붙이잖아요. 왜냐면은 제가 만든다는 보장이 없고 누군가가 만든다는 보장이 없어요. 마켓 다 알면 그 사람은 천재지 천재. 무튼 다들 집단 지성을 위해서 좀 더 서로를 존중하고 서로가 알아들을 수 있게 좀 더 논리적으로 이유를 붙여서 이야기해 주시면 그게 좀 더 좋은 방향으로 저희 방을 이끌어 나갈 수 있을 거라는 생각을 합니다. 무튼 지금 우리 쿠오모 형제들은 큰일 났네요. 쿠오모 형제들은 좀 많이 망한 것 같고 이 정도면은 그냥 그쪽 형제들이 좀 문제가 있지 않나라는 생각이 듣고 있습니다. 일단 오늘 커버할 내용은 다 커버를 한 것 같죠, 사실상. 뭐 오늘 사실 좀 중요한 내용이 딱히 있지도 않은 것 같고 이미 제가 말씀드렸듯이 암호화폐가 떨어지는 부분에 대해서는 말씀을 드렸고 중국 쪽에서 더욱더 규제를 강화해서 모든 결제에 관해서 모든 암호화폐 결제에 관해서 지금 규제를 때렸기 때문에 모든 건 다 불법이야! 라고 규제를 때렸기 때문에 결국에는 뉴욕 주지사 일 잘했는데 성추문이 참 왜 그럴까? 사람들은 개인적으로 제가 뭐 예전에 다녔던 아주 중학교 때 다녔던 교회가 있었는데 그분 목사님도 굉장히 많은 일 잘하시고 많은 여러 일들을 사회를 해서 해주셨던 분인데 성추문이 생기셔가지고 작살나셨어요. 뭐 참 항상 느끼는 게 관리를 잘해야죠. 아랫도리 관리를 좀 잘해야 될 것 같아요. 그렇죠. 사퇴한 거죠. 사퇴. 개인적으로 참. 종이 쇼리지도 왔다고 하네요. 뭐 요즘 생겨난 게 많습니다. 그리고 뭐 오늘 있었던 물을 좀 더 추가로 뭐 이야기해드릴 부분들이 있으면 얘기를 해드릴 텐데 오늘 끝난 것 같아요. 일단 헝다그룹 오늘 있었던 큰 뉴스 두 가지만 이야기를 하면은 헝다그룹 이자 못 냄. 그리고 중요한 거 두 번째 암호화폐 중국 내에서 거래 자체가 불법. 이렇게 돼가지고 이 두 가지 뉴스가 큰 거고 나머지는 딱히 뭐 뉴스가 있는 것 같지 않죠? 예. 그래가지고 글쎄요, 이거 말고는 딱히 그렇게 큰 그런 건 없어 보입니다. 예. 부스터샷에 관해서도 이 부분 조금 다뤄드릴게요. 부스터샷은 원래는 전체가 다 맞는 거여서 예, 축소했어요. 축소해서 몇몇 나이 많은 분들이나 약자 계층이라고 해야 되나? 예. 노인 혹은 특정 계층만 맞는 걸로 했습니다. 파월은 끝났어요. 파월은 끝났습니다. 파월 연설이 아니고요. 파월이 질문하고 대중들이 답변해주는 약간 그런 섹션이었어요. 중요한 이야기 없었어요. 중요한 이야기 없는 섹션이었습니다. 지병 있는 사람들, 지병, 취약계층, 지병 있는 사람만 맞는 걸로 했습니다. 배당주 좋죠. 저도 배당주 좋아합니다. 단 제가 배당이 많지 않아서 그렇지. 배당주를 많이 안 들어가고 성장주 위주로 저도 포트폴리오가 짜여 있어가지고 배당을 많이 받아본 적이 없네요. 미국의 파티 문화가 한국보다는 문란한 편이긴 합니다만 직장 내 성적인 부분에 대해서는 굉장히 단호해요. 인사이더 셀링이 많으면 보통 안 좋은 시그널인데 셀링이 많으면 안 좋은 시그널인 경우가 많죠. 시그널인 경우가 많은데 그 대신에 예를 들어서 모더나 같은 경우 이미 시작 때 처음부터 계획된 인사이더 셀링이 많았어요. 많았는데 결국 지금 30불에서 400불 됐죠. 결국 인사이드 셀링이 많다고 해도 컴퍼니의 펀더멘털이 튼튼하면 다시 상승하기 마련입니다. 뭐 유니티도 뭐 결국 복구하긴 했죠. 오래 걸리긴 했지만 인사이더 셀링도 금액도 중요하고 어떤 이유로 인사이더 셀링이 되었는가도 중요하고 락업 해제가 돼서 인사이더 셀링이 나오는 건 당연히 가격 하락을 하는 경우가 많습니다. 많은데 락업 해제로 인한 하락 같은 경우는 뭐 시간이 지나면서 복구가 되는 경우도 많고요. 배당주 많이 갖고 계시는구나, 예님. 예은님이 역시 제가 봤을 때 투자의 고수가 아니실까라는 생각이 드네요. 테슬라와 배당주 역시 원래 안전빵이 최고인데 제가 안전빵에서 벗어나서 좀 무서운 투자를 하다가 그러게요. 더 공부해야 될 것 같아요. 저 같은 경우는 배당주도 많이 좀 분배를 해놨어야 되는데 배당주 쪽은 많이 안 들어가 있긴 해요. BAC 좋죠. 뱅크 오브 아메리카. 웰스파고는 요즘 많이 안 좋죠. 웰스파고는 요즘 규제 받나 안 받나라는 이야기가 흘러가고 있어가지고 뭐 지금 어떻게 보면은 여기에서 잘 빠져나오면 저평가된 가격으로 살 수도 있겠지만 리스크가 올라가 있는 상태예요. 나스닥 양전하나요? 너무 좋아. 너무 좋아. 근데 오늘 중국주 손해가 되게 큰데 카사바 사이언스 하나로 복구됐네요. 카사바 사이언스 하나로 복구. 거의 한 30% 올랐네요. 행복하다. 결국 손해본 거 다른 걸로 메꾸기. 근데 카사바 사이언스는 왜 오르는지 찾아봐야겠다. 왜 오르지? 뭐 해결됐나? 월배당 받을 때마다 행복하죠. 아 진짜. 그럼 진짜 좋을 텐데. 아무것도 없는데? 뉴스 없는데 왜 오르는 거지? 카사바 사이언스 뉴스 없네요. 뉴스 없는데 계속 올라주는 중이네요. 카사바 사이언스는 근데 약간 밈 주식이랑 비슷하게 움직이는 경우가 있어가지고 좀 조심스럽긴 합니다. 그러게요. 아 저도 500명씩이나 오늘 봐주시고 계셔서 너무 감사하네요 오늘. 네, 치매약입니다. 지금 치매약인데 지금 조사 중이에요. 조사 중이에요. 예. 리스크 큽니다. 맞아요, 맞아요. 저는 다오 쪽도 하긴 했었는데 예, 지금 비중이 좀 작긴 해요. 뭐 저번에 뭐 골프 쪽도 좀 투자를 하긴 했었고. 아 지금 뭐라고 말하나요? 지금 아직 조사 중인데 데이터 매니플레이션 데이터 조작했다고. 코인은 일단 인기가 그러니까 매일 알트 코인은 그냥 인기가 제일 중요한데 아마 셀러브리티가 좀 중요한 것 같아요. 좀 유명한 인플루언서들이 같이 홍보를 해주는가. 시바이누 코인. 아 크리스님 감사합니다. 아유 그렇게 말씀해 주셔서 감사하죠. 오늘 일단 저는 모든 방송을 끝마치고 이제 점심 좀 먹으러 가야 될 것 같고요. 네, 통화하러 가야 될 것 같아서 곧 마무리를 해야 될 것 같아요. 마무리를 해야 될 것 같고. 네. 러셀 2000 진입은 호재죠? 네, 러셀 2000 진입은 호재입니다 기본적으로. 네. 마지막으로 제 대머리 사진 한번 보고 가겠습니다. 제 대머리 사진. 비행기에서 뛰어내리는 대머리 사진. 오징어 게임 재밌더라고요. 봤는데 경진님 보고 어땠는지 다음 방송도 와주셔서 말씀해 주시고요. 그리고 점심은 글쎄 국밥 먹고 싶긴 한데 아직 고민 중이네요. 그리고 이번 주 주말 라방은 집 하우징 마켓 인플레이션하고 가격 하락에 대해서 이야기하려고 생각 중이니까요. 생각 중이니 여러분 꼭 참가해 주셔서 같이 저와 이야기를 나눠주시길 바랍니다. 국밥집 먹방에 한번 생각해 볼게요. 핸드폰으로 아직 제가 라방하는 게 익숙치가 않아가지고 아마 토요일 아침 10시 한 20분 10시쯤으로 생각하고 있고요. 한국 기준 오후 11시입니다. 아무튼 여러분들 항상 보통 아침 10시쯤이에요. 토요일 아침 10시 한국 오후 11시쯤 하고 있습니다. 항상 참가해 주셔서 도와주시는 분들이 있어서 일단 너무 감사드리고 다른 분들도 참가해 주셔서 저와 이야기 나누면서 제가 보통 주말 라방은 주제 하나를 정해서 거기에 대해서 제가 리서치를 통해서 여러분들과 같이 공유하는 시간을 갖고 있는데 그런 부분들에 대해서 여러분들과 같이 이야기할 수 있는 시간 가질 수 있으면 좋겠습니다. 네, 여러분. 제가 먹방을 하면은 너무 맛있게 먹어서 여러분들도 배고파지고 살찔 것 같아서 일단 자제하고 있습니다. 아무튼 여러분들 오늘 너무 수고하셨고요. 네, 먹방은 제가 한번 생각해 보도록 하겠습니다. 아무튼 여기까지 뉴저지에 사는 남자, 유익한 정보를 사랑하는 남자 유산함이었고요. 여러분 좋아요, 구독과 알림 설정 부탁드리고 이번 주 주말 토요일 아침 10시 혹은 일요일 아침 10시인데 아마 일단 토요일 아침 10시에 라방을 할 거로 이미 생각을 하고 있고요. 이번 주 주말에는 말씀드렸지만 주택 가격에 대한 문제가 미국 내에서 어떻게 되고 어떻게 해결이 되고 있는가, 하락장이 오고 있는가에 대한 이야기를 해보려고 생각 중이니까 꼭 참가해 주셔서 저와 같이 이야기를 나누실 수 있는 시간 가지셨으면 좋겠습니다. 여러분 여기까지 뉴저지에 사는 남자, 유익한 정보를 사랑하는 남자 유산함이었고요. 먹방은 꼭 생각해 보도록 하겠습니다. 여러분 여기까지 유산함이었습니다. 감사합니다.